All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Berg. I'm an environmental engineering master's student at the University of New Hampshire. And today I'm going to be talking about the project that I've been doing for the past 6 weeks for the Coastal Hazards, Equity, Economic Prosperity, and Resiliency Hub, or CHEER Hub, talking about how critical infrastructure can power hurricane resiliency. So first, I'd like to take you through a little scenario. So if you could imagine, you're on your way to work, you're being driven to work, or if you work from home, you're going to the grocery store. So you're traveling somewhere. So while you're doing that, were you thinking about the road? Pause. Showing up as the screen, just the first screen on this. Oh, it's not updating on Zoom.
The shared screen is not the slide version.
Okay, looks like this one on. Here we go. That's doing it.
Are you sharing your PowerPoint or the screen or what?
Maybe if I share the entire screen.
Yeah, and you could try to do that.
Sorry, everyone, technical difficulties. Entire screen? Yeah. I think that matters. That would be better.
Yeah. Because you're showing it on the entire screen.
Right.
See if they're seeing that now.
Okay. All fixed, I think. Hopefully. Okay. So back to the scenario. You're on your way to work. So while you were traveling, were you thinking about the road that you were traveling on? And I'm not just saying the road name or turn left at the light, but the physical structure that's connecting you from your house to work. Or the bridge that you crossed over that allowed you to get from one piece of land to the next without a 30-minute detour. Or the gas station having gas and your ability to fill up your tank to travel that distance, or charge your electric vehicle, if you have an electric vehicle, or your ability to pay for those gas or your electric bill. And lastly, any other infrastructure that you saw around you. These things can often be overlooked in everyday life because we rely on them so much. But when disaster strikes, they become really imperative to the response. And they can be the difference between life and death for some people. So now what if that road that you took to work is washed out? Now that might be frustrating because now you have a little bit of an extra drive to work, but in a response that could be the difference between you evacuating from your home or the area that you live. Or if that bridge is now out of service, you having to get around it, and now those roads are also closed. So how do you evacuate from a dangerous situation? Or the gas station that you rely on is now out of gas because it's been a few days in the disaster. And now your electrical tower's out. So how do you charge your vehicle or communicate that you are in need of help? And how some may say most importantly is how is the integrity of your home? So these things, while overlooked in everyday life, are really important and become crucial in disaster resiliency and response. So the goal of my project was not only to meet those of CHEER, but more specifically was to obtain stakeholder perspectives on what are the most important and the most vulnerable pieces of infrastructure within the communities in which they work, and their effects on people's ability to respond and be resilient in hurricane situations. And so we met with a whole lot of people, and the questions that I was asking were, what were those most vulnerable pieces of infrastructure that were in your area and why? So, and then what were the most important pieces of infrastructure and why? Because those might not necessarily be the same things, although they could be. And then if we had time during our meetings, talking about what infrastructure mitigation projects that they're working on currently and how they prioritized them over others. So we met with a lot of different people, as you can see from all of these logos, but we met with people from academia, from nonprofits, to government agencies, and then more on a spatial spectrum from towns to county members to even someone that's affiliated with the state. So a wide variety of people and perspectives, which is great when you're trying to get qualitative data like this. And so I thought it would be helpful to show you kind of where we've been the past 6 weeks. So these are the, I think there's 12 interview locations that we were in person, as well as a couple on Zoom that we had, even one in from another cheer spot that they do research on, which is in Houston, Texas. So I thought it would be interesting just to show you not only where we met, but also how inundated this area is with water. So this is Eastern North Carolina, which is one of the cheer hub places of research. And then on the next slide, you'll see the floodplain. So now you can see how inundated Eastern North Carolina is with water and how important it is for these structures to work when there's so much water coming in, not only during a hurricane, but also when the storm surge, so when the water starts rising. And so as for the responses that I got from the community, there were a multitude, as you can see. So I kind of tried to boil it down into 3 different categories. The first one being transportation. So I'm not sure if you can see those highlighted things, but that was one of the most important that people mentioned, not only for people to be able to get from point A to point B, but also for emergency vehicles to be able to get people out when they might not necessarily be able to travel. Secondly was electricity or having power, which gives people the ability to not only be aware of what's going on, so being able to receive messaging, but also be able to reach out when they do need help, or have different emergency managers contacting one another, or the National Weather Service receiving their information so that you can be informed and make the right decisions when it's comes that time. And lastly, aging or antiquated infrastructure in need of maintenance. So a lot of people that we met with talked about how there was a lot of infrastructure that was built in the past century that is in need of update, but when it comes to hurricane response, that's not necessarily where all the money needs to go or where it is gone. So, but having these systems working can have a true impact on the ability for people to respond during hurricanes. So things like having roads cleared, culverts cleared, streams, and things like that. And then lastly, I just wanted to note the last few that didn't fit quite into those categories, like stormwater management systems, water towers, overwater systems, but most importantly was humans, human life, and someone's individual home, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So for the next couple slides, I'm going to go through kind of the experience that we had, some of the stuff that we've seen and learned about as it pertains to each of the 3 categories: transportation, communication, and aging infrastructure. So first, this is Highway 12 in Dare County, which is out on the Outer Banks. We were actually out here, and right over those dunes on your left is the ocean. And there's some water also that's on the right. So this road gets washed out, which is a key evacuation route for a lot of people who live in these coastal areas. So it's important to keep in mind when you're making decisions that these might not become available once a hurricane hits. Another thing that we noticed a lot was the overwater infrastructure. There are a lot of bridges, and as you saw in the map, so many pieces of water that kind of finger into the pieces of Eastern North Carolina. So bridges are a huge thing out here, and I didn't really notice how much they relied on them. And what'll come up later is the ability for boats to get under them. So the ability to get people in and out of there and not have to have a swing bridge is something that will come up later. But this is also in Dare County out on the Outer Banks. And this one, which might be the most impactful, is Highway 70, which many of the people that we met with mentioned, which is right off of the Neuse River and gets extreme flooding during hurricanes. So what I'm going to show you is imaging from Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence. So Hurricane Matthew hit on about October 8th in 2016, and this was October 13th. So when you're talking about hurricanes and this infrastructure being able to be resilient, it's not necessarily right when the hurricane hits can it take that initial storm, but also its ability to respond to the storm surge and the water coming in after, or the damage or debris that's around. So this was on October 13th, and then still 3 days later, that water is still inundated throughout the highway, leaving it, which this is a key evacuation route as well, just like Highway 12. So, you know, it also doesn't allow people to get back to their homes as time goes on, if the road is still covered in water. And then this is from Florence. So as you can see, this is a recurring issue. So how can we change this for the future, know that there are these problems, and be able to allocate resources, not necessarily take them away from other places that need them, but put them towards something that can make a community more resilient. Secondly, communication and power. This was something that people talked a lot about. So being able to get information across far distances, or people that aren't necessarily on the ground, being able to get forecasting information or flood information to those who are on the ground responding, is of true importance, because when you're on the ground and there's no communication systems, how can you get to the outside world and tell someone, well, I need a generator here because we don't have electricity, and these people that have now been taken out of their homes need to be a place to stay. They need electricity, they need something. So being able to communicate is something that's really important. So this is also off of Highway 12. This is in Rodanthe, which we visited out on the Outer Banks. But as you can see, this is the only stretch of power line across this whole piece of the Outer Banks. So as you can imagine, if some sort of debris knocked down one of these pillars or lines, then that would leave the whole community on the other side out of power, which can really have a damper on the quality of life and the ability to respond after a hurricane. And as I said, this road gets washed out a lot, so the ability to actually get there and fix that power line might not be a possibility. So having redundancy and backup is really important in these communities. And then the last thing I'll mention is being able to use pumps and generators. That was something that was mentioned a lot, is the ability to stand up the water and get it out so that, and store it somewhere else, is something that was really important, so that people can carry on after a hurricane. And then lastly, antiquated systems or systems in need of update and maintenance. So you can see a lot of this wherever you go. There's old systems everywhere. But something that Avery Smith, who's the New Bern stormwater superintendent, mentioned was that you can plan the best retention pond or wetland or whatever, but if you don't take care of it and you don't maintain it, it's not going to stay that way, which I thought was really insightful and important when you're building and designing new systems for an area, making sure to keep in mind that these have to be maintained over time and it takes resources to do so. This I thought was funny, also scary, and I can't believe I was out there, but this is a pier out in Nag's Head off of the Outer Banks. And as you can see, this was not designed this way, but over time was changed by the way the sand and the water kind of moved the beams, but it's a completely uneven surface, and it even has a little sign that warns you of that. So just a kind of visual of how things can change over time. Secondly, a brick culvert, which I had never seen before. And this is in New Bern. Avery Smith showed us this. And as you can see on the left, there's also another pipe culvert right next to it that was built to try to alleviate some of the flooding and overtopping of this railroad that's up here, which might have to an extent, and maybe a while ago it did, but now the railroad still overtops, which leaves you can't run rail cars over anymore. And there's a community right on the other side of this that gets flooded time and time again. This was something that I personally experienced, which I thought was interesting, was right here in Greenville, where we've been staying. There's this little kind of stream that runs through the community that we're in. And as you can see, there's 4 different culvert outlets that lead to the stream, and they go, I looked up in Google Maps because I was curious. They go right down into like a pond in a different community. But we had some really big rainstorms towards the beginning of our stay here. And during one of them, I noticed as we were getting dropped back off that this stream had been completely overfilled. as you can see here. And this was just any regular rainstorm. So something that I thought, I forget who pointed it out, but was really important. It was the Raleigh Stormwater Manager, was that these stormwater systems aren't necessarily built to hold that capacity of water that a hurricane brings in. Maybe only the 100-year storm at a maximum. So when you're having all of this water coming into one area at one time, things are going to flood. And the past channelization of a lot of streams to make water move faster has also degraded streams' ability to slowly release water over time. Because that water is going to move quickly to wherever its outlet is and then pool there. And, you know, the water doesn't care if there's a community there that is vulnerable. It flows where it flows. So kind of transitioning into something that I noticed throughout the communities when I was asking about mitigation projects is sustainable innovations in infrastructure. So looking towards the future and making sure we're planning and using long-term planning for the future. So I'll go through a couple examples. And something that Bob Edwards, who's a professor of sociology at East Carolina University, is to build back better. So build back better than you found it or than it has been. On one of the first trips we took, which I thought was really interesting, was this seawall that not only functions as a damper for wave energy so that the houses that are right across the street don't get the energy of waves hitting against the house, but also these cutouts that help the water to recede back out, which I thought was really cool and something that I hadn't seen before. Just an example of how things can have dual purpose. So maybe while in a hurricane, this could have a true purpose, but now it's just kind of something that's there, an aesthetic maybe. Another example was Alligator River Bridge, which is a swing bridge. That's also a key evacuation route. They're building in the back a new bridge that's going to be taller, like I mentioned earlier, so that boats can get under it. Because the problem with swing bridges is that in times of hurricane or disaster, when the electricity goes out, maybe that bridge gets stuck in its horizontal position so that when boats can go through. So cars might not necessarily be able to get over it. So this will allow people to not only be able to evacuate and give them a safe evacuation route that's reliable over time, but also allows boats to get over it in everyday life. Something that Avery Smith also showed us was this wetland, which I thought was interesting because it isn't every day used for gathering floodwater, but also helps to filter it. So there's these big pump outlets that put the water into the wetland, and they're a retrofit for a community so they can filter out the water and take out any pollutants. One of the most interesting ones that I thought of which we saw was in Raleigh, which is the Johnson Dam. So the flooding that I showed you from Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence, sorry, this is upstream of the Neuse River. So this is a dam that's been here for a really long time and was turned over to the Raleigh Stormwater Management Municipality in 2018, and they retrofitted it to have the ability to release water slowly over time or open and close an outlet so that they can release water quickly. So say they know that the hurricane is coming and they know it's predicted to be X amount of rainfall, which equals Y amount of height in the lake. They know, okay, over the next couple days, we need to release that amount, maybe even a little more, just for security, so that downstream isn't overwhelmed during that hurricane, because they're already going to get their own rainfall. So when you're releasing all that from upstream, it just overwhelms them. And lastly is the importance of monitoring and keep making sure that these systems are working over time, which going in and talking to the community really showed me the importance of that. And you know, what in those communities is important when it comes to hurricane and resiliency. And all roads lead back to people, which is kind of what I'm getting at with this visual. But everybody that we talked to was kind of alluding to the point that none of these infrastructure pieces really matter if they're not serving the people or serving their purpose. So if they're degrading over time and now they don't do their original job, then it's not really working. So how can we prepare for the future, use long-term planning to make sure that people are served and they're able to be resilient in times of disaster? And these are just a couple that I picked out from our meetings that I really liked. I won't read them, but I thought they were powerful. So to reiterate, our key takeaways are that transportation, communication, and old infrastructure are what the community finds most important when it comes to infrastructure and hurricane resiliency. The importance, as I said, of long-term planning. So making sure you're looking forward to the future, not looking to just fix the problems of today, but also to look and maybe intercept problems that might come in the future. The dependence that we have on the success of our infrastructure, which we may not think of every day, but is something that is truly important when disaster does strike. And those things aren't necessarily available, as I said, could be the difference between life and death, getting that ambulance to the house in need, rescuing those people from the water coming in. And then the value of the community perspectives, as I just said, knowing who the people are who live there, what they think is most important in times of need, because they're the people who are going to need response, who are going to be affected by these disasters, and the fact that people are the most precedent in these times of need, and that it's not necessarily the infrastructure, but who the infrastructure is serving and their trust that they have that it'll work when they need it most.